Outside a construction site, Keanu Reeves' act brings everyone to tears. The wind howled down the downtown Los Angeles streets, brushing past skyscrapers and sweeping into the early morning bustle of a construction site. Jackhammers echoed faintly in the distance. Trucks rumbled across gravel, and the air carried a mix of dust, diesel, and brewing coffee. It was just past 6:30 a.m., and the crew was already streaming through the front gate, orange vests glowing under the cloudy morning light. Among the steady shuffle of boots and conversation stood a lone figure, Frank Patterson. 67 years old, a former army sergeant, and now a man carrying more years of service than dollars in his pocket. He stood just beyond the entry gate, holding a handwritten cardboard sign that read, "Will work for food. Army vet. Anything helps." He wore a faded green military jacket, its shoulder patch nearly rubbed smooth, and beneath it a threadbare sweatshirt. His jeans were frayed at the cuffs and mud-stained, and his once sturdy boots looked more like they were held together by memory than leather. A duffel bag, faded and sun-bleached from years of exposure, hung loosely from his shoulder. Frank's eyes were tired, but not hopeless. He didn't shout or shake his sign. He stood there quietly, with the same dignity that had carried him through the battlefield and now through the streets of a city that barely noticed him. As the workers streamed past, some glanced at him. Most didn't. A few shifted uncomfortably. Others deliberately avoided eye contact. A younger worker in a grey hoodie muttered to a friend, "Sad, huh?" before stepping through the gate. Frank caught snippets of conversation as men passed him. Another one of those vets. "Should be in a shelter, not hanging around here." "Ain't our problem, man." Inside the gate, overseeing the entrance with a clipboard in one hand and a paper cup of coffee in the other, was Rick, the site foreman. Mid-50s, stocky, with a thick neck and a no-nonsense attitude, Rick had been managing job sites for over 20 years. He believed in hard work and running a tight ship, but compassion wasn't something he carried around with his tool belt. Rick spotted Frank from across the lot, his lip curled. "Hey," he barked, walking toward the gate. "You can't stand here." Frank nodded, respectfully, without lowering his sign. "I'm just looking for work, sir. I used to do plumbing, general labor. I don't need a handout, just a shot." Rick scoffed, unimpressed. "Yeah, so do 50 other guys. This ain't a charity. We don't need dead weight hanging around, making the place look bad." "I'm willing to do anything," Frank said calmly. "Clean up, load, unload. I've done it all." Rick took a long sip from his coffee, narrowed his eyes, and shook his head. "Buddy, we don't have time for sob stories today. You're slowing people down. Why don't you try down the block?" Frank didn't flinch. He just stood there, clutching the cardboard tighter as the wind pulled at its corners. "I just need a chance." Rick turned his back and walked off, muttering, "These guys never give up." Behind him, one of the younger workers, Lewis, paused near the fence. He was in his mid-20s, sharp-eyed and new to the crew. He'd noticed Frank that morning and hadn't said anything, yet. He shifted his weight, unsure. Near the trailer office, Tina, the site administrator in a denim jacket and worn boots, had seen the exchange. She frowned as she sipped from her thermos and glanced toward Frank. She knew people like him. Her own brother had served and disappeared into addiction after coming home. Tina pulled her coat tighter and walked over to Rick. "That guy's just asking for a job," she said quietly. "And I'm trying to run a work site," Rick shot back. "We can't just let anyone off the street come in. What if he falls? What if he sues?" Tina folded her arms. "You could at least offer him some coffee." Rick rolled his eyes. "You want to run a soup kitchen? Go downtown." Frank remained where he was, feet planted on the sidewalk like he had nowhere else to go. He watched the crew disappear into the maze of steel beams and scaffolding. He felt the weight of the city pressing down on him, thousands of people moving in 100 directions, and none of them seemed to see him. Then the rumble of a black SUV broke through the noise. It pulled up smoothly to the edge of the site. No flashing lights, no photographers, no entourage. Just one man stepping out, wearing worn jeans, a faded black hoodie, and sunglasses. It was Keanu Reeves. The crew hadn't expected him. He was in town doing research for an upcoming film and had quietly arranged to tour the construction site for authenticity. He liked to show up low profile, no press, no handlers, just curiosity and kindness. He spotted Frank almost immediately. Keanu approached him casually, hands in his pockets. "You all right, sir?" Frank blinked in surprise. "Yeah, just hoping to find a little work. Done some plumbing, general stuff. You from the crew?" Keanu smiled. "Not quite." He looked down at the sign, then back at Frank's face. "You served?" "Gulf War, 23 years ago." Keanu nodded with quiet respect. "Thank you, seriously." For the first time that morning, Frank smiled faintly. Most people just walk by. Keanu looked toward the gate where Rick had vanished. He could tell something had happened. The energy was all too familiar. Quiet dismissal, assumptions, misjudgments. But Keanu wasn't the kind to shout or flex fame. Instead, he looked Frank in the eyes and said, "Mind if I walk you in?" Frank looked stunned. You do that?" Keanu grinned. "You've done a lot more for people you never met." And together they stepped toward the gate, leaving the cold sidewalk and walking straight into a story that no one on that construction site would ever forget. The hum of construction filled the morning air, grinding metal, shouting foremen, the occasional blast of a horn. The smell of sawdust and diesel settled over the site like a gritty blanket. Frank shifted on his sore feet, rubbing his hands together, his breath puffing out in small clouds. His sign dipped slightly in the breeze, his fingers stiff with cold. He stepped forward as Rick reappeared near the gate, clipboard in hand, barking out orders to one of the crane operators. "Excuse me, sir," Frank said, his voice calm but firm. Rick didn't look up right away. When he finally did, the irritation was immediate. "I told you already, this isn't a place for handouts." "I'm not asking for charity," Frank said politely. "I just need work. I'll clean up trash, haul gear, sweep, whatever needs doing. I've worked sites before. I've done plumbing, framing, roofing." Rick cut him off with a raised hand. "Look, man, you think I don't see guys like you every week? You all got the same story. You're a vet. You're broke. You want a chance. Then what? You fall down and sue the company? Or worse, can't keep up and get hurt?" Frank stood his ground, his shoulders slightly sagging but not backing away. "I can pull my weight. All I need is a chance." Rick scoffed and walked off without another word. As he passed a group of workers unloading cinder blocks, he muttered loud enough for them to hear, "Guy needs to beg somewhere else. We don't have time for sob stories." The laughter that followed wasn't cruel, but it wasn't kind either. It was the kind of uneasy chuckle people give when they don't know what else to do, when they're uncomfortable but don't want to speak up. Luis, the young worker with sharp eyes and a soft heart, paused mid-lift and glanced back toward Frank. Their eyes met for just a moment. Luis wanted to say something, wanted to tell Rick to back off, to remind him the man outside the gate once wore a uniform and risked his life. But he didn't. Not yet. Instead, he turned away, jaw clenched. Inside the trailer office, Tina was watching. She had noticed Frank since he showed up that morning. Something about the way he stood, quiet, dignified, not demanding, had stirred something in her. She saw the way Rick dismissed him, the way the others pretended not to see, and when she saw him start to shiver, still standing tall with that crumpled sign, she couldn't take it anymore. She grabbed her spare coffee thermos from the break room table, slipped out the door, and made her way toward the gate. Frank looked up as she approached. "Hey," she said gently, unscrewing the lid. "Looks like you could use this more than I can." Frank's brows raised, touched by the simple gesture. "That's very kind of you, ma'am. Thank you." He took the thermos with both hands, holding it like it was gold. Tina smiled. "I've got a brother who served in Iraq. He's had a hard time too." Before Frank could respond, Rick's voice rang out from across the lot. "Tina! What the hell are you doing?" She turned slowly. "Just being a human being." Rick marched over, red in the face. "We've talked about this. Don't encourage stragglers. You give them coffee, and next thing you know they're sleeping behind the porta-johns." Tina didn't flinch. "He's not asking for a handout. He's asking for a job." "Well, he's not getting one here," Rick snapped. "And if he's still out here by lunch, I'm calling the cops." Frank quietly handed the thermos back to Tina. "I don't want to cause trouble." Tina shook her head and pushed it back into his hands. "You're not. You're the only one here acting with any dignity." Rick stormed off, muttering under his breath. Frank took a deep breath and looked down at the warm steam rising from the thermos. He stayed by the gate, a quiet presence, unmoving. But across the yard, more than one pair of eyes had started to notice. And one pair of sunglasses, just arriving in a black SUV, was about to change everything. The hum of the construction site continued like clockwork. Nail guns popping, steel beams groaning into place, and the clang of machinery echoing down the street. Rick shouted orders from the scaffolding, while Tina stood quietly in the office trailer, watching Frank sip from her thermos outside the gate. Then, without fanfare, a black SUV pulled up along the curb. It didn't look like a big shots car, no tinted limo, no entourage stepping out first. Just a clean, modest black vehicle that slid to a stop like it didn't want to draw attention. The door opened, and out stepped Keanu Reeves. Dressed in dark jeans, a worn grey hoodie, and boots that looked like they'd seen
The hum
plenty
of construction
miles,
filled the morning
air,
air,
grinding
grinding
metal, shouting for. He moved like someone used to blending in, not demanding attention, until someone recognized him with a gasp from across the street. "Is that? Holy crap, that's Keanu Reeves." The murmurs started. Phones began to slip out of pockets, but Keanu didn't pay them any mind. He wasn't looking at the site. Not at the scaffolding. Not at Rick barking at workers. He was looking at Frank. The old veteran stood by the chain-link gate, still holding his cardboard sign, his face calm but tired. His shoulders had begun to sag in the cold. He didn't notice the actor at first until Keanu quietly walked up and stood.
The hum
right
of
beside
construction
him.
filled the morning.
"You served?" Keanu asked softly. Frank turned. He squinted for a second, caught off guard. "Yeah," he said after a beat.
The hum of
Gulf
construction
War,
filled
desert
the morning
shield,
air,
desert
grinding
storm,
metal,
army
shouting
engineer
foreman,
battalion,
the occasional
Keanu
blast
nodded
of a
slowly,
horn,
respectfully.
one pair of
"Thank you for your
sunglasses,
service,"
just
he said.
arriving in a
Frank
black
gave a half
SUV,
smile.
was
"Thanks.
about to
Did some
change
plumbing
everything.
and framing before that. Now just trying to get back on my feet." Keanu looked him over. "You looking for work?" Frank gestured toward the gate. "Tried. Wasn't exactly a warm welcome." Keanu glanced at the construction site beyond the fence. His eyes caught Rick, who was standing on the scaffold, shouting again. Tina peeked out from the trailer, watching carefully. Rick didn't seem to notice Keanu yet, or care. But Luis did. He was mid-lift with a bucket of concrete when he froze, elbowing the guy beside him. Dude, that's John Wick." Keanu turned back to Frank. "What's your name?" "Frank Davis." Keanu smiled. "I'm Keanu." Frank chuckled. "Yeah, I gathered. What kind of stuff can you still do?" "I'm not 20 anymore," Frank said, "but I can still haul, clean, cut, whatever needs doing. I don't need a handout, just a shot." Keanu reached into his hoodie pocket and pulled out his phone. He turned back toward the gate and started walking, straight through the open entrance and toward the office trailer. Frank blinked, confused. "Where you going?" Keanu grinned. "To find the guy who thinks this site runs without respect." He disappeared behind the fence. Frank stood frozen. Tina stepped out of the trailer as Keanu approached. "You the one that helped the vet outside?" he asked. Tina nodded slowly. "Tried. Rick wasn't having it." "Where is Rick?" "Up on the scaffold." She started, but Keanu was already moving. Rick saw the actor coming and climbed halfway down the scaffolding to meet him. "Keanu Reeves," he said, confused. "No one told me you were coming. I'm scouting for a film scene, just wanted a low-key look at the site." Rick straightened, suddenly overly polite. Sure. We'd be honored to show you around, anything you need." Keanu's voice lowered. "That man outside, Frank, why'd you send him away?" Rick stiffened. "Look, we get guys like that all the time. They say they can work, but they're usually just—" "He's a vet," Keanu said, and by the looks of it, he was the only one here who didn't ignore someone in need. Rick opened his mouth, but no words came out. Keanu looked around. The workers had stopped moving. Tina stood with her arms crossed. Luis had walked closer, listening. Keanu said, just loud enough to be heard, "Maybe you don't need another pair of hands, but maybe you could use a little more heart." He turned and walked back toward the gate. Frank was still there. Keanu smiled and handed him a business card. "Don't worry about this place. I know someone who'll hire you. Real work, decent pay, and a whole lot more respect." Frank's hands trembled slightly as he took it. "I don't know what to say." Keanu patted his shoulder. "You already said enough when you showed up." Word spread like wildfire. By the time Keanu helped Frank step into the SUV, a quiet crowd had gathered near the gate. Workers had paused mid-task, their hard hats still on, holding tools but no longer moving. Phones were out, not just to film, but because something about the moment demanded remembrance. Lewis, the youngest on the crew, jogged to the gate as the SUV door shut. He waved awkwardly. "Hey, Frank. Right? I just wanted to say, I'm sorry, man." Frank gave him a small smile from the window. "You didn't do anything wrong." Lewis shook his head. "Exactly. I didn't do anything. I should have said something." From the trailer, Tina stepped out with a steaming cup of fresh coffee and set it gently where Frank had stood minutes earlier. It was her silent way of honoring the man who had, for a brief moment, reminded everyone what dignity really looked like. Inside the SUV, Keanu sat beside Frank, dialing a number on his phone. "I've got a friend who runs a non-profit construction crew," he explained. "They help vets get back on their feet with real jobs, training, housing assistance, the works." Frank looked down at the card Keanu had given him earlier. "I wasn't expecting all this." Keanu smiled warmly. "That's the thing about life. The good surprises often show up when you're least ready." Back at the site, Rick had gone quiet. Standing stiffly in front of his crew, he scanned the faces around him and realized something uncomfortable. Nobody was on his side anymore. Tina walked up to him. "You embarrassed us all today," she said. No anger in her voice, just disappointment. Rick's jaw tightened, but he couldn't argue. Not after what they'd all witnessed. Later that evening, a short clip from the job site hit Twitter. Keanu walking with Frank, helping him into the SUV, their quiet conversation barely audible, but full of respect. Someone added subtitles and a heartfelt caption. "Keanu Reeves doesn't just act like a hero, he is one. Today he lifted up a man everyone else ignored." Within hours, it had over 2 million views. By morning, hashtags like #Respect Frank, Keanu, Kindness, Heroes Help Heroes were trending across social media. News outlets ran the story, fashion blogs called Keanu the most dignified man in Hollywood, and veterans groups nationwide began sharing their own stories under the thread. Frank, once just another invisible man on a street corner, became a symbol. The construction site, too, saw a transformation. Luis suggested organizing a monthly food drive for veterans in the area. Tina set up a fundraiser that raised $10,000 in a weekend, and even Rick, humbled by the fallout, issued a public apology. A week later, Frank returned, not to ask for work, but to thank the crew for their support. He wore new boots, a clean jacket, and the glow of a man beginning to rebuild. This time, when he walked onto the site, every worker stopped to shake his hand. But it wasn't about pity anymore, it was about respect. As Frank looked around, he spotted a note taped to the fence near where he once stood. It read, "Don't ignore the people who built the world we live in. One day, that could be you." No one signed it, but everyone knew who wrote it. Back in Hollywood, when Keanu was asked about the incident during a press interview, he simply said, "I didn't do anything special. I just listened. That man earned his place a long time ago. The world just forgot. I just reminded it."